It's 12:03, and so we will go ahead and get started. There may be some others that join us along the way, and we will welcome them when they arrive, but we want to be sensitive and aware of people's time. So I just want to first say welcome and thank you for joining us today for our virtual porch session. We are focused on Parents Reconciling Network, and if you don't know what that is exactly, that's okay. You're going to learn all about it today. My name is Emily Bagwell. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I live in Atlanta, Georgia. I am one of the staff members, a part of Reconciling Ministries Network. My role is resource manager. We'll have introductions of the facilitators for this call, but first also want to give a shout out and a thanks to another one of my colleagues, Ophelia, Hugh, Kinney, who is on the call with us today. Ophelia is our communications director and based out of Maine. So we are grateful for the support of the staff of RMN and look forward to our conversation today. I do want to give just a couple of words of instruction to help us engage with each other. This is meant to be a conversation. I know we are all living in the Zoom world where we're navigating what that looks like and how to do that. So I want to give a couple of words of just guidance for you all. We have a small enough group where I can visually see you if you have your video camera on. If you don't, that is okay too. We can utilize the chats area where you can enter a question that you have or a comment that you have that you want to incorporate into our talk for today. I'll be monitoring that alongside Ophelia, so we'll make sure to include your voices. We are going to, the way that this is going to work today is we have several kind of presentations that will help lead us into, again, the conversation. And in between our two main topics for today, there'll be a Q&A. So if you have thoughts along the way, you can go ahead and, you don't have to wait, you can go ahead and put those in the chat, or when we arrive at the Q&A part in response to each topic, you can utilize, again, the chat or simply raise your hand, and we would love to hear from you as we talk today. So we are joined by some very special folks who are a part of what Reconciling Ministries Network call our extension ministries. That is a number of different groups that have been organized and led throughout the years of our grassroots organization to focus in some particular areas. So Parents Reconciling Network has been a part of who we are to give parents and allies and supporters of LGBTQ persons a place to come and have conversation, to talk, to have support, to learn, and to grow together. So I'm very thankful for the many different leaders that have been a part of this throughout the years. We have a couple of our board members today that will be leading the session. I'm going to pause now and give them a moment just to introduce themselves. And before I do that, I just want to welcome anybody who has just joined us. Thanks for being with us for this virtual porch today. We'll ask, if you don't mind, if you're not speaking, if you could put your microphone on mute, just so that it helps us with any background noise and that sort of thing. And again, there'll be time for us to have conversation, and you can take yourself off mute at those moments. But I do want, again, to welcome our board members who are helping to lead today's conversation. The two topics that we will be talking about are some of the myths that stigmatize LGBTQ folks. And that first portion will be led by Janet Duke. Janet, if you'll wave and introduce yourself for just a moment.
Thank you. So I am Janet Duke. I'm part of the Parents Reconciling Network board. I'm in my second term. I became connected with the Parents Reconciling Network through a conference I guess 6 or 7 years ago, and learned so much through it that I joined and then later became part of this board. One of the things the board wanted to do was build a website with information for families, and we weren't able to do that in our board work, but I was able to form a nonprofit and do it independently. So there's an organization called strongfamilyalliance.org. It maintains a website focused on helping youth come out and helping families become allies. So I'm glad to be here today. I look forward to talking to you.
And then next we have Jim Waugh, who joins us, who will be leading our topic on tips for supporting your child and managing emotions. Jim, if you'll say hello and introduce yourself, please. Oh, Jim, you're on mute.
you go. Yeah, my name's Jim Waugh. I'm a retired pastor in the West Ohio Conference. My wife Carol and I live in Grove City, Ohio, near Columbus. Carol and I are the parents of two daughters. Our oldest daughter, who turns 44 on October 4th, came out to Carol and me during her senior year in college. She and her partner live and work in Portland, Oregon today. Currently, I am the chair of the Parents Reconciling Network board. Because of that, I'm also on the Reconciling Ministries Network board of directors, where I chair the personnel committee. And in the West Ohio Conference, for over 10 years, I've served as a facilitator, convener of a strategy group for reconciling work in West Ohio. And after I retired 7 years ago, I began offering a group in the Columbus area twice a year for parents whose kids have come out. I have about 4 sessions in each of those times in the spring and the fall. So I'm glad to be on the call today and glad you're on the call today. So thanks a lot.
Thanks, Jim. And then lastly, Joy Leet joins us as another one of our board members who's been a part of this team planning this session today. Joy, will you say hello and introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Joy Leet. I'm a retired local pastor. Very new to the board, this year, a member. And I'm feeling still rather new to this whole process, concept. My 2 younger children, the youngest one came out as a lesbian 9 years ago, and then she transitioned and became, and then the elder one, so I have 2 transgender children now, and I'm delighted with who they are. I'm glad to be here, and I'm basically here to listen and learn and help when I can.
Thank you, Joy. And we appreciate all of you being here. And we know that each one of you have stories, whether or not you are a parent of or an ally and a support to folks in the LGBTQ community. And that's what we are here to do together today as a part of this virtual porch, is to learn and to grow together. So know that you've come to a community of support even here and now on this call. I do want to note that we are recording this session. We do that for a variety of reasons. It helps us just as we pay attention to ways that we can learn and grow from what we do. But also we know that there's many who the times just don't work and they want to be tuned in to what's going on and to conversation. So we hope that others will be able to visit this. But I do want to say especially that you do not have to share your personal story in this call. One of the reasons why we wanted to do this as a virtual porch was to have a big invitation and make sure that people know about this group. And we recognize that often these are conversations as we are seeking to understand more fully and to live into what it means to support and affirm the people that we love in a more powerful and in a good way, is that we have questions and we want to provide a space where parents and others can live into that more fully together. And that's what this Parents Network is all about. And so today is just meant to be a taste. You're going to be invited at the end of this into some follow-up sessions, which you'll hear more about. But let's go ahead and get started with today's conversation. First, Jim is just going to return to Parents Reconciling Network and tell you just a little bit about who that is, what that is, as we get started today. Jim.
Thanks, Emily. Yeah, Parents Reconciling Network began in 1999 when Bruce and Virginia, that'd be Jenny Hilton, they were both United Methodist pastors and parents of a gay child. They brought parents together, and their aim was to present a visible witness of parents in support of ending the United Methodist Church's anti-LGBTQ stance, and sought to provide their LGBTQ children with the same rights as cisgender heterosexual United Methodists. Their first witness in action on behalf of their children was at the General Conference in Cleveland in 2000. And since that time, parents have been present at each of the General Conferences to remind the church that our LGBTQ children are persons of sacred worth, and to call for the church to break down the walls that keep our children outside the church, that keep them from marriage in the church, and that prohibit our children from fulfilling God's call to being in ministry, especially ordained ministry in the United Methodist Church. Our work is guided by a Parents Reconciling Network board, and we have some of those board members on this call today, and I'm glad to see them. One of the main projects, and one of the best ways PRN, Parents Reconciling Network, has been known, has been through the distribution of stoles, really the making and distribution of stoles. These stoles, each of the general conferences for many years now, parents have and others have been given patterns, been given materials, have sewed stoles and sent them back, and they were distributed at general conferences and at the convocations that RMN has held. And so today, you can still get one of these stoles. They're available. There's information on our Parents Reconciling Network Facebook page if you've not checked that out. And we'd be glad to have you and to have you get one of these stoles as well. We've also had a newsletter. Right now that's on a hiatus as we figure out how best to do that in the future. But speaking of the future, as we move into these days, as we are excited about the possibilities of the use of social media and of this Zoom platform, even after the pandemic, as a way for PRN and RMN to be a resource for parents and families when they have children who have come out as LGBTQ. This is our first go around with this, so we want to see how this goes. I'm sure we'll learn a lot from it. I just want to say thanks again to Janet Duke and Joy Leet, Emily Bagwell, being part of the planning team for this event, and also to support of Ophelia, Hugh, Kinney, as Emily's also already indicated her role in communications for RMN, for putting this virtual Porch experience together. And also thanks to Jan Lawrence, our executive director, and to RMN for supporting and encouraging this effort. And thanks all to each of you, for being on this call today. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Jim. I hope that gives you a little bit of background about PRN and its development. I'm very thankful for all the voices who have contributed, and grateful for Janet now, who's going to share with us myths that stigmatize LGBTQ folks. Janet, thanks.
Thank you, Emily. I have to say, this is my least favorite topic of all the ones we're going to talk about over these 3 sessions. We have so much positive information to give you, but when you talk about myths, you're talking about more negative things. But at the same time, these are the kind of questions that parents often wrestle with when their children first come out. These are the kind of things that get thrown at you by unaccepting relatives or people in the community. And these are also the kind of questions, the kind of things that your child may hear. So I think it's really important to have a way to think about those and address those that is more positive. So bear with us as we go through this. There are about 12 myths that I want to address. I've only got 15 minutes, so I'm going to blow through these pretty fast. But I hope they will give you some talking points and maybe some information if you have someone that throws one of these at you or you're wrestling with it yourself. Let me put this in screen show so you can see it a little better. So the one you hear probably most common is that the Bible condemns homosexuality. This is old one. And I would just point out that's not what Jesus's ministry was. He was far from condemnation. And in fact, he was completely silent on homosexuality. He says nothing about it. What you hear more about really is 7 of what are called, sometimes referred to as the clobber passages, the 7 verses in the Bible that supposedly condemn homosexuality. And out of the tens of thousands of verses in the Bible, only these 7 are used over and over. But what's actually true is that Christians have taken certain literal verses and interpreted them over time in a way that is more humane and more perhaps in line with the will of God. For instance, if you look at slaves and slavery, there's hundreds of verses in the Bible that talk about that. There's also verses that portray women as property, that forbid divorce, that endorse a patriarchal society or impose religious laws. And all of those have been changed over time, and I believe this is one of them. However, I would also point out that there's no such word as homosexual in any of the source languages for the Bible. I just kind of recently found this out in a course with a scholar that was teaching a Bible study. That's not a known word in the ancient world, and that those references typically concern violence, temple prostitution, pederasty, torture, all kinds of things, but not homosexuality as we know it and know it today. A second myth you hear a lot is it's a choice. You know, they just choose to be that, or it's a phase, it's just passing, and nothing could be more untrue. Scientific consensus is very much that both sexual orientation and gender identity are innate. They're not something that's learned, taught, or acquired. And that if you think about it this way, it's no more a choice than what you are. You know, if you're heterosexual, if you could imagine yourself for a moment as something as different as you can be. Maybe if you're male, imagine you're female, or if you're straight, imagine that you're trans. And just for a moment, hold that thought and think, now I have to live all the rest of my life as only this in every thought and action and how I present myself, and how exhausting and impossible that would be. And that's often the force that is placed on LGBTQ individuals to try to be something other than they are. You can't change your sexual orientation, and neither can they. I also thought it was kind of amusing when I found this out. You sometimes hear humans are the only ones that have same-sex relationships, and it turns out that's not true. There are hundreds and hundreds of documented pairings among other species, including some of our favorites like penguins and giraffes and koalas. So I thought that was a little interesting. You hear that homosexuality is abnormal, and this is one that has really carried some hardship. And it comes from a ruling in 1955 by the American Psychiatric Association that actually included homosexuality as a mental illness in the diagnostic manual. And for nearly 20 years it was there, and it was treated as a mental illness. And then in 1973, they eliminated this diagnosis. They issued an apology. They stated it is not an illness, it does not require treatment, and it's not changeable. And today, virtually every medical group and professional counseling organization agrees, and this is just a partial list of those. But another bad thing came out of that saying that it was an illness, and that is decades of what are known as conversion therapy or reparative therapy. And in fact, this is something that in 2016, the United Nations categorized as torture, and it's banned in 20 states. But unfortunately, it is still available. And I would say on my website, within the last few months, I've received a request from a grandfather wanting to know where can I send my grandson. So it's still out there. But I would point out that it's going away, it's being banned. And in fact, in 2013, Exodus International, which was the largest, it was a huge reparative therapy, quote, Christian organization, shut down after 37 years. And this is just part of a long letter that the president wrote at the time of regret and remorse. And he said, we've been trying to impose our view on others and say that that's God's will, and it's not worthy of us and worthy of them, and they shut down. So hopefully it will fade over time, but you may still hear this again, and that's the horrible history on it. I did something wrong is a worry that often occurs to parents when their child first comes out, particularly if it's a surprise to them. It's not always, but often it is. And it's just completely untrue. Again, orientation and identity are natural and innate. You didn't learn your own orientation. If you think about it, it was perfectly natural. And in fact, studies show that around the age of 7 to 13, most youth start identifying their sexual orientation and their gender identity. And in fact, with gender, it sometimes starts much earlier, even in the toddler ages. However, they often don't say anything about it. And for those of you who had children that came out as adults, they know they're different from societal norms. It's really hard for us to realize how incredibly gender-focused our society is. Boys and girls, blue and pink, strong and pretty. You know, boys play with war toys, girls play with dollies. You know, and kids know this from the very first, and they begin to realize they're out of step, and they don't say anything about it. And in fact, until about 10 years ago, the most common age of coming out was college age or later. Now, the average age of coming out is about 14. So it's really shifted, but that also means that these youth are in the home a lot longer. So we're trying harder and harder to support parents who may be worrying, did I do something wrong or is this abnormal? In fact, in the US, there's an estimate that somewhere between 3 and 5 out of every 100 people are LGBTQ. And you've known them. You've probably known multiple ones, but you may not know who they are because they may not be comfortable enough with you or with society or with themselves yet to be that public about it. But we all are engaged with people that are LGBTQ, and how we interact and how we present ourselves and how we talk is very important. As a parent, you didn't cause this, but there's a lot you can do to keep your child safe and healthy, and that's really what we're going to focus on the next sessions that come up. How can you be the best possible parent to this child? You sometimes hear, could my child turn others gay? And absolutely not. Lots of times adolescents and kids imitate. They may imitate a celebrity, but sexual orientation is not learned. What may happen is others may come out to your child, and in fact, sometimes you hear this claim from another parent, your child made my child gay, and it's completely not true. What's true is they were not recruited, but rather they may have recognized a common bond. It's not uncommon for an LGBTQ child to confide, or youth to confide in another LGBTQ, or to reach out online to someone who's LGBTQ because they're looking for that connection. This is awful when you hear that they're a danger to children, and that's not true. LGBTQ have the same protective instincts for children as heterosexuals. And in fact, sexual attraction to children has nothing to do with homosexuality. It's pedophilia. It's a psychiatric disorder, And in fact, the research shows that most pedophiles are men married to women. They're repulsed by all adults. They prey on children of either sex, and they really target children they know in their circle of acquaintances or family. There's just nothing to suggest that this is true. In fact, there is quite a bit of increasing research about LGBT couples and raising children, and they find that those children are just as healthy, just as mentally tough and mentally adaptable as any other more traditional arrangement. Allowing gay marriage will mean anyone can marry anything. This one's kind of gone away, but you might hear it still. And it's the old slippery slope argument. If we allow gays to marry, where are you going to draw the line? Can they marry their dog or their horse or whatever? It's just kind of a horrible thing. But bear in mind that marriage still, if you hear it, is always between two consenting adults. And there are no consenting adults in that other situations. Homosexual practice is a sin. Sexuality is more widely regarded as God's gift to people, and that it arises from our capacity to love others, and that it's an expression of desire and of connection. It's really morally neutral for homosexuality, heterosexuals, any sexual identity. I would like to propose, and I thought about this many times, that our view of male and female gender and their roles may be too small for God. And I like this little quote from the Ecclesiastes, but the thing I would encourage any parent who's struggling to consider is that their child may be exactly what God created them to be and deeply pleasing to him. That's a whole nother view of what God meant when he created a child. Marriage can only be between a man and a woman. This one's also one you still hear a lot, but I would argue that biblical arguments for a man-woman marriage kind of ignore all the other changes our culture has accepted about biblical marriages, like we reject polygamy. We don't say women are a husband's property, or they can't own anything, it all belongs to the husband, that inheritance is only for sons, that daughters are sold in marriage by the father to increase the estate. None of these are regarded as guidelines anymore. So this is kind of a throwback to that older way of thinking. And I would say that the sanctity of marriage is based on the commitment of the couple, not on their gender, and really not even on the words that are said of them. It's a matter of mutual love and respect that makes union strong and valid. Sometimes you'll hear that opposing homosexuality is Christian, and I think this is really a case of using God and faith to disguise someone's own fear or discomfort, and it's certainly not Christian. I often think when I hear someone blaming, saying, this is not true, this is not what God wanted, I think of that line that's shown here from Matthew about those who come between a little one and God. It's better for them to be thrown into the ocean with a millstone. To interfere with someone's relationship with God by condemnation is, to me, just a horrifying thing to do. And our role is to extend God's love to others, not to be judgmental. Accepting, you're hearing this a lot now in the church, that accepting LGBTQ will ruin the church. And again, we're here to shed the good news, not to judge and condemn. And again, Jesus constantly reached out to marginalized people. Condemning churches are losing members, and I can witness to this personally. You probably can, those of you who have children. I was just speaking to a church last week, and one of the things, the group was 18 people in a moderately big church, 300 or 400 families, 18 people there whose children had come out and left the church. And there were more members who had left the church following their child. And family withdrawal from church life can become complete. That one thing that people don't realize is there's been a lot of study of what is damaging to LGBTQ. And the number one harm that can come is rejection by the family. The second worst one is rejection by their faith when they were raised in the church. The other thing to consider is that accepting congregations often draw new and younger members. The same group I was mentioning, I said, I would just like to know, when was the last time you saw a young family join your church? And there was this long silence. And then they said, it's probably been 2 or 3 years, because families are looking for churches that are able to walk the talk, that really apply the golden rule. So myths can harm. I know you may have had them thrown at you. You certainly know your children are hearing them too, or your grandchildren or your relatives. So it's important to find your balance, help them, and be able to address those. So I think we have a chance now to have questions or comments, or let's
Yes,
see.
thank you, Janet.
Yeah.
And again, I would like to invite everybody, if you're not speaking, if you don't mind putting your audio on mute, just to help us with the background noise. And welcome to those who joined at some point as we got started. We're really grateful for today's conversation. What Janet was just sharing with us are myths that stigmatize LGBTQ community. And thank you, Janet, again, for that wonderful presentation of those to help us open up the conversation. So we do want to take a time now. This is, and we decided, instead of doing 2 topics and then waiting for Q&A all at the end, is that we would take a moment and pause at this point for a time of Q&A. If anybody has a question that they would like to ask, you can simply raise your hand, or if you want to put it in the chat section right now, and we can help to illuminate those as we move forward. So does anybody have anything they would like to add or comment or ask of Janet or others who are on the call?
I would be curious too, which myths you're having thrown at you or have had thrown at you by your families in the past.
Or if there's other myths that are myths but have been used in this same topic.
I think the myth that inviting LGBTQ folks into the church erodes the church is such a fascinating one to me, because of exactly all that you said so expertly, Janet, that folks are leaving the church because there's no place for them or their loved ones, but also that I think what people are attributing to church decline has a lot more to do with just like the life cycles of denominations and churches. And I wonder if folks compare, for example, the United Methodist Church to non-denominational or Baptist churches that seem to be growing, but as far as all the research shows, are also experiencing decline of folks in some key demographics and age groups. So I think it's such a fascinating trend that folks are worried about, and then queer and trans people kind of become the scapegoat for people's worries about churches. But that's just kind of been my musings on that really interesting myth.
No, I think that's very true. And I think part of the struggle is that, especially in the past and to some extent now, as a young person comes out or begins to identify differently, if they're not welcomed into the church, if they're not actively affirmed, they leave. Silence comes across as condemnation. And I cannot tell you the number of parents I've talked to, and this was my personal experience also. My daughter was raised in the church. I mean, it was a big part of her life. Youth was a big part of her life. And when she was a junior in high school, they turned to her during a youth meeting, and the youth director said, "So, do you consider homosexuality a sin?" And there was, I don't even know what happened. It was months before I found out about this, but that was 23 years ago, and she has never set foot in a church unless I ask her to go on Christmas. And she is a spiritually longing person. She would like to have a relationship, but she also says, and I know this may be heartbreaking to those of you on the call, when someone tells me they're a Christian, I'm afraid of them. And that is a terrible indictment of us as a community and of the Christian church. And if we have done that, we must change it. And I think that's what RMN is trying to do.
Along those lines, Janet, we had someone ask a question in the chat that I think is perfectly tracking with that thought that perhaps, I don't want to assume others' questions or concerns in this, but from what we hear often is that this is a foundational concern for so many of us who desire to see LGBTQ persons not only included, but affirmed and celebrated in our churches and our communities that is a home for so many of us, and that has maybe perhaps been home to those persons before they came out, but felt betrayed or made to feel unworthy. But that the thought is, but once a church rejects a kid who comes out and the young person does leave, how do you undo that damage? And I think a number of us would have different personal reflections and stories. And that may just be something for us to sit with today and not necessarily to answer. But Janet or Jim, did you want to comment any further?
Yeah, I would like to comment on it. That certainly is a personal spiritual journey, so you can't fix it for somebody. But what a lot of families do is they move as a family to an accepting church. And that is a big affirmation on the part of the family that says, we are going to move with you and we're going to find a community that loves and accepts you. So that is a tactic that I've seen a lot of families do. Sometimes the young person just doesn't want to be connected to it again, or they may find their own way. There are accepting churches, and you can actually do a Google search and find what churches accept LGBTQ, and they'll connect you to ones in your community. So that's one thing that people do, but that is a terrible wound, and it can take a long time to recover. I certainly don't have all the answers on that.
Yeah, I would say I agree with that. I think, it's very harmful when that happens, and it happens, I'm sure, more often than we would like to really think it does happen. And sometimes with even a higher risk to that child in terms of their own spiritual life and just their life generally, because of what that can cause in terms of that rejection, or when they are told they are not of any worth because they are gay. So I think, Janice, to try to connect with a community that is open and affirming and accepting of LGBTQ persons is a step in the right direction, and hopefully can seek then to rebuild trust that has been hurt and harmed, and all that's been harmed by the message given out by those who would teach otherwise. So that I think is the best thing to do. I think just one other word I want to offer in this conversation too, that there are a lot of the fast growing churches today In fact, I know of a large mega church in Cincinnati where it's one of the fast growing churches in the country, several campuses now across Southwest Ohio and around. And, you know, they come across being welcoming and friendly to everybody. They meet you where you are. But when you scratch the surface underneath, they do not welcome LGBTQ persons as LGBTQ persons. They teach against homosexuality if you really push hard enough. I was at one of these churches, this church one time when right after the marriage decision, and I heard the pastor say, you know, that he would never do a same-sex marriage. But they're always welcoming, always friendly to everybody. Everybody can come here. Yeah, you can come here, but they won't accept you fully as who you are if you are LGBTQ. Just a word.
Jim, just to move on with our time, I'd love to shift. And if you have more thoughts or questions related to these myths, certainly you're welcome to still put those in the chat section. But if we could move on to our second topic for the day that Jim is going to lead us in, and it's tips for supporting your child and managing emotions. So Jim, will you lead us now?
Yes. So today I want to offer some tips for supporting your child. We'll also talk about emotional support as well. These tips are useful when your child comes out to you or has come out to you, or as you continue to journey in that. It's also helpful for anyone who would come out to you if they trust you enough to tell you that they are gay or they're lesbian, they're bisexual, they're transgender, they're queer. That's an important information they impart to you. And if you know others who are struggling with in their family, these are also good tips for them that you could possibly pass on to them. It's really so important that we communicate love and support to our children or to others who risk coming out to us, especially if they are just beginning to explore what it means for them to be lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer. I'll be using primarily today the initials LGBTQ for that today, rather than naming those each time. And these tips today are adapted from a page on the Strong Family Alliance website that Janet Duke and a team from Austin, Texas put together a few years ago with many good resources on it. And they borrowed some of these hints from PFLAG, which is an organization that also supports parents and families and their LGBTQ children. So we'll put that address of the website up in the chat. You can also receive that through an email too, if you give us your email later. But the first tip for your child I want to lift up is appreciate when a young person comes out to you. Whether it's your child or another child or adolescent, that's the age range in which persons often come out, or whatever age they may be, that they have probably been thinking about coming out to you for a while. It's not likely to be just a spur of the moment kind of thing. They have talked, they most likely wrestled with what to say and when to tell you, and that they are LGBTQ, when they are lesbian or gay or bisexual, transgender, or queer. When someone comes out to you, your primary task is to respect their courage and honestly thank them for trusting you and to continue to care for them. Especially if this is your child or someone else's. Be sure that you let them know that you love them. The thing about young people is that they come out in many ways, and sometimes it can be nice and neat, but many times it can also be messy. I know a family where their son decided to come out on Facebook one evening. He was a teenager, adolescent, and in his post, he used some less than appropriate language in what he had to say. And his parents didn't know he'd come out. But his son, their son's cousin, read his post on Facebook and proceeded to tell his father, who was the uncle of the young man who'd come out and a brother to the father of the young man. So late at night, the brother calls his brother, who was the father of the boy, and lets him know that his son just came out on Facebook. And needless to say, that's not the neatest way to do this, but you know, given the social media age we live in and the way our society is perhaps not unusual, that might happen. But most importantly, after they got past some of the language issues that that their son used on his post, they both expressed their support and their love for their son who had come out. Next, respect confidentiality. When your child has come out, there may be family members that they do not want to know yet that they are LGBTQ. It might be another parent. It might be their grandparents. It might be an aunt or an uncle. It might be just another significant adult in their lives. When someone shares their gender identity or sexual orientation with you, you have received a confidence which must be respected. Be guided by the wishes of the person who confided in you. The child must be able to come out to others as they choose and feel ready, as difficult and awkward as that might be, especially when it comes to family relationships and situations. Learn where to seek help. If you sign up for our follow-up sessions, we're going to spend some more time talking about resources and places where you can find help, or your child can turn to for help. Now, fortunately, in most cases today, there are more resources available for adolescents and their families. There may be a drop-in center for LGBTQ youth in your community. Perhaps there's a PFLAG group. You can find counselors who are supportive and helpful and who will be safe persons that you can talk to and process what all this means for you and your family and for your child. Pastors and youth leaders can be a good source, but you really need to know their theology before you talk to them, as we've already been discussing today. And there are many good books and videos that can be helpful as well. Maintain a healthy perspective. Sexuality and gender identity make up a small but important part of every person's identity. Your LGBTQ child is still the same person you have known and loved for years, and that person is still there and cares enough about you to be deeply honest about themselves. They've trusted you with the most personal and risky information that they can, and they are hoping you will still love them. It's urgently important to do so. However big this difference may seem to you, the larger person, the child you love, is still there. Don't let this smaller part overshadow that. Understand the meaning of sexual orientation and gender identity. And actually, this could be a whole nother 3-part session thing we could do sometime. At least 3 sessions, because it's an important to have the basic understanding of what these terms mean, and they are not the same. And I just have those up here for you today. Just a very brief kind of way of explaining this or talking about this. Sexual orientation describes romantic, emotional, or sexual feelings toward others. People do not choose to be heterosexual or homosexual, as Janet has already reminded us. They simply are. And this is about attraction to another person. Gender identity is a person's inner sense of being male or female, or perhaps even gender fluid, and not in the binary of male and female that we in our culture have created and accepted. But again, it's not something we choose. Our gender identity is a part of who we are, even when someone knows that their real gender identity is not the one they were assigned at birth. Be supportive. The 3 most important things you can do, along with loving your child when they come out to you, is be supportive, be supportive, be supportive. Many lesbian and gay, bisexual, transgender youth feel alone, afraid, and ashamed because of these religious or societal or familial pressures to be heterosexual, to be the gender that they were assigned at birth. You can assist by listening with care to their feelings and concerns and offering a supportive and non-judgmental presence, and remembering they're equally valuable to the world. Anticipate some confusion. You know, even in the best of circumstances, adolescence is not an easy time for children or for their parents. Feelings, emotions, the need to experiment, try things out, the desire to begin to develop one's own identity and explore relationships are all a part of growing up. And then, you add into that the questions or matters about sexual orientation or gender identity for a young person, for a youth, and you really have quite a mix for both the child and for the family. While many youth are aware of their sexual orientation and gender identity even before early adolescence, this awareness takes years to fully integrate. Often they're in the middle of adolescence when their self-image is rapidly changing. And you can help by affirming to them that their feelings are normal and natural, allowing them to wonder about themselves and try on different ideas. This is typical of the teen years when most people struggle with questions of who we are and how we fit in the world. This is no different for LGBTQ youth. Listening to their thoughts builds communication and can provide insight. Remembering that no one can be talked into or out of the gender they identify with, even if it's not the one they were assigned at birth. And the same thing goes for sexual orientation. They cannot be talked into or out of their sexual orientation. We are attracted to people to whom we are attracted, and we are who God has made us to be. And please do not dismiss what they express to you about their gender identity or sexual orientation as a phase that they're going through. This diminishes the youth and their identity. It also is a form of denial in a way by the parent, and their child does have their sexual orientation toward someone other of the same sex, or that their gender identity may not be the one that they have been assigned at birth. Going along with that in many respects is the next way you can help your child, and that is help but do not force. If you're heterosexual and comfortable, you may not fully understand what it means to be different in ways LGBTQ individuals experience. The best clues for how to help will come from your loved one, from your child, from your LGBTQ friend. Don't force them into your frame of reference to make it easier for you to understand. Remember, teen years are often a time of experiments in appearance, activities, and interests. Be open and patient. And then challenge homophobia, just like these myths that Janice shared today. Speak up when you hear anti-gay jokes or disparaging language, and always function as if there is an LGBTQ youth in your midst, even if you don't think there is. Your words and your example will send the message that offensive remarks will not be tolerated, that you are affirming of LGBTQ people and their families. It will also send the signal to an LGBTQ youth or any other LGBTQ person that you are a safe person with whom they can talk. Don't perpetuate injustice and ignorance by remaining silent. Defend others' dignity. Standing up this way may be part of your own coming out as a parent or as an ally for LGBTQ youth and adults. So I want to talk also in the few minutes I have left about managing your emotions. In these few minutes I have left, I want to highlight just a few things. Another article from the Strong Family Alliance website. This one has to do with managing your emotions. When your child comes out as LGBTQ, this requires a rebalancing of family relationships within that family picture. Your role as a parent is finding your own path and keeping your balance and helping all the children involved, which may include siblings. And the child's role is learning how to live positively and work with the challenges of their newly shared identity. However off balance you may feel when your child comes out, it's important to avoid laying your fears and worries on your child. Healthy parenting suggestions include avoid venting to your child. It's essential that your child not become a lightning rod for the many emotions you may feel. Concerns about the future can be heightened now, and it's important not to use your child as a place to work through your emotions. Find personal support. Again, this kind of goes back to finding help and resources for you and your child. And, we'll spend more time in that in some of our follow-up sessions. But I do want to say that after your child's come out to you, don't blame yourself for your child being LGBTQ. Janet referenced that as well today. You didn't do anything wrong. As I said earlier, it's not a phase. This is who your child is. And often Christian parents are conflicted because of the teachings they have heard in church that homosexuality is a sin. And that's that is not the case. And in one of our follow-up sessions, we're going to talk about some of those clobber passages in the Bible. If you need help, find a counselor with whom you can talk about these issues for you and your family. And get informed. Again, we'll be talking about resources like things on the Strong Family Alliance website. Also excellent books that there's a list of books on their website and other places, books that debunk the clobber passages and incorrect teachings about homosexuality that's taught in many churches. And again, listen. It's important on the other side of being supportive. Talk less and listen more. Keep communications open. And help the family keep its balance. Maintain the ordinary, keep routines going for school, teams, or extracurricular activities. And also offer support to siblings. The other children in the family may need your support as well. Perhaps your LGBTQ child has come out to them already first, or maybe they don't know yet, but help them deal with their questions and their fears as well. So that's about my time now, and so I'm going to turn this back over to Emily, and we'll go back into the question and answer session.
Thank you, Jim, so much for sharing all those wonderful points of ways in which we can support and manage our emotions with our children. I do want to say, I know that we want to be respectful of people's time, and we always seek to land right at an hour. And so you may need to go when that time is ready for you. We will take just a few minutes to have, if you have any questions that you would like to ask of what we've covered today. But before we get into that, just in case people do have to pop off, a couple of things. One is that if you would like to, if you want to leave your email in the chat section, so that we can specifically follow up with you. Several of you have asked about these presentations that were made today, and you've heard it referenced that about a couple of follow-up sessions. That's being planned so that we can kind of live into further developing a community of support. And if you'd like to attend one of the 2 sessions, you'll get a direct email from Jim and Janet and the PRN board inviting you to those. We'll also make sure they're announced through RMN. But I know that many of you wanted the content from today's session. So if you'll just leave your email, we'll make sure to follow up with you directly about what we've covered today. And then again, stay tuned to hear about when those follow-up 2 sessions is what we have planned right away. Already have the material developed for that. And so you'll be getting more information about the content and when those sessions will take place. So again, just wanted to invite you for that email. So thanks for joining us today, everybody. And like I said, we'll stay on for a few more minutes for any Q&A that any of you might have a question about anything that was just shared as well. Does anybody have anything that they'd like to ask at this time?
I don't know if this is an ask or just a question, but I know I was going to put this in the chat. I've had a woman who've come to me she's raising or helping to raise her grandson who just came out to her at 12 years old. And so as a grandparent, she's got a whole different set of difficulties because the father is not affirming whatsoever and has threatened to throw the boy out of the house. And so she's trying to be that grandparent who's supportive, but knowing that she's got boundaries because of the father. So I just as a thought, as a topic, because there's so many more grandparents that are raising children nowadays, that maybe there's some way we can address that.
I could just briefly speak to that, Marcia. There's a lot of research on what happens when families reject. And one of the things that they find over and over is that even one person in the family is supportive and accepting and continues to love and support that child, it makes an enormous difference. And every additional person in the family that does that increases the strength and resiliency of the LGBTQ individual. So one thing I would say is she should do all she can to affirm and support that child. It's not her child, but she can love him as a grandparent.
And I would hope that somehow, she could also help to, be barrier almost. I don't want to know whatever you want to use there in terms of like, you know, when the father has that attitude, it's very harmful. And I don't know if the child knows how the father feels right now, but whatever the grandmother can do to intercede in a way for that child and to support that child, as Jan said, is so important. And whatever other resources that she can find and she can be helped to find, perhaps, that would mitigate some of that, that would really be the best thing. But it is a difficult situation. Yes.
I'd also like to mention, I just posted up in the chat, there's a TED Talk about gender identity and sexual orientation that I think it's just a TED Talk, but it's really good. And if anybody would like to learn a little bit more about that specific thing about gender identity and sexual orientation, it's an easy way to do it, and one I would recommend.
Great. Well, thank you all for being here again. And I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. If you have more questions, again, if you'll leave your email with us on the chat, if you'd like to make sure to get the personal invitation to the follow-up sessions and to get the material that we used today. Many of you have already left that, but do that before you leave if you want to be on that email list. But we really appreciate your time today and allowing us to come into your homes. That's one of the powerful things about this time we're all in. So thanks for sharing your time with us. And may I just have a prayer with us before we leave today? Receive this blessing. God of us all, you remind us that we are yours and that we are your beloved and that you have called us good. As we leave this time today, may we feel affirmed in who we are as individuals and know that your love is meant to be shared and experienced by all of your children, especially our children and youth and adults who are LGBTQ. May you guide us in ways to more fully and inclusively include and love all of your people at all times, in all places, in all the ways that we can, so that your goodness might be known to each one of us. God, grant us the strength and the boldness to step into places where we feel uncomfortable. Help to give us a peace. Help to enliven our spirits to more fully embrace all of who you are. For we know that you are a big God who loves us all. So we ask this and pray this in the name of your son, Jesus. Amen. Go in peace this day. Thanks for being a part of this session, and we'll look forward to connecting with you again in the future. Thanks so much, y'all.